Good afternoon, everyone. I hope that you can hear me and see me. My name is Haim Yacobi. I'm a professor at the DPU, the Development Planning Unit at the Bartlett. And I'm very, very happy to be here. What I've planned for today is to share with you, I think in general, a very strong line of research and teaching at the Bartlett, which focuses on health, but also, some more specific ideas about our relatively new master program, Health in Urban Development at the DPU. So I think that the question that I would like to discuss today, and I hope that if you have any questions or comments, you can share at the end. So the question is, why do we need urban health experts today? And if to put it in a more provocative way, why architects, planners, social scientists need to, consider health as a high priority, not just in their everyday life, but also as part of their profession. So my approach starts with my very interest in urban life, in cities, in everyday life of people who live in cities in the global south and the global north. And there is a general understanding that cities as social, political spaces are very, very liberal, very open. And cities somehow celebrate our ability to live with people who are not like us. And here in the photographs, you can see Paris, Bogota, Freetown, and I think that it's very, very interesting that despite of the huge differences between cities, we can always find similarities that has to do with diversity and with, a very ideal notion of celebrating everyday life in cities. And cities are good to us, not just in order to celebrate anything, but also because access to education, employment, and different opportunities is higher than in non-urban areas. And if we look at urban history, we know that these were very much the issue, or the subject of attraction to people who decide to migrate from rural areas to cities. And as I've mentioned before, cities are also more tolerant, and diversity in relation to religious, gender, and other social elements are the opportunity, for people to feel free or to feel freedom. And also, from very practical point of view, cities are much more dense than suburbs or rural areas, and hence providing services, social supports, et cetera, is much more easy than providing services to larger areas. And finally, and unfortunately, I will not be able to discuss it in details, cities are also spaces where global phenomena are linked to local, if you want, conditions. Have a look, for example, at the whole issue of migration and employment. So you can understand that cities attract people not just locally, but also globally. And here again, you have photographs from Freetown, from Paris, from London, and you can see that the notion of diversity, access to services is very much, or to to the beach, for example, like you can see in the bottom right hand. These are all spaces that exist in cities and attract people to live in cities. But obviously, cities are not just wonderful spaces to live. They're also spaces of conflict, of violence, of segregation and hypersegregation. And hence also, I would argue, cities are spaces where we can witness significant health disparities between different groups. And what we are witnessing these days, before the pandemic also, is that morbidity and mortality are rising both in global south and global north in general, and in urban territories in particular. So on the one hand, we can see how cities are wonderful spaces to live. On the other hand, we can see how cities could be spaces that creates inequality. And inequality, social inequality, that has to do with housing conditions, access to infrastructure, transportation, education. All these elements will also lead to health inequalities. And we need to understand it because this is, the dark side of urban life. And this is where we, urbanists who are interested in health, have a role. And here in the bottom, you can see 3 photographs from 3 different cities. You can see Cali in Colombia, where informal settlements, are part of the urban fabric, and also health inequalities are very much visible there. Belfast in the middle, a post-conflict city, but still very much polarized, where health inequalities are very much part of the agenda. And also London, you can see a homeless sleeping in a tent in front of a very fancy shop not far from UCL. And you can see that inequality also reflected, if you want, in health inequalities. So it's very, very interesting to see that the field of health, let's say in the last 2-3 decades, there is a more recognition that we need to understand health in a wider sense, i.e., it's not enough, to go to the doctor if you have a health problem. We need to live in better environments. We need to live in a better and equal society in order to achieve better health. And Jason Corbin put it in a very nice way, because he claims that if urban space matters for health and well-being, why there is an overemphasis on treating people for a specific disease or risk, and then sending them back into their place where conditions made them in the first place unhealthy, okay? So this kind of argument is very, very central to our work. And especially since we have a very strong emphasis on global South urban context, these questions are very, very much into the discussion. And, I will not go into many details, but what we are witnessing, especially in the global South, is a growing number of people who don't have access to clean water, sanitation, and hygiene. And you can see that mainly or most of these issues are concentrated, in that case, in sub-Saharan Africa. We can see that the death rate of people who are dying because of bad access to water, sanitation, etc. I mean, it's a very, very central element that causes health inequalities and hence mortality. When I mention it, I mean, all this data, again, is, we need to take into account that we cannot measure the real numbers in many parts of the world. So I would assume that the numbers are even more dramatic. And what I'm trying to hint here in relation to the previous slide is that we need to take into account the urban environment as an important determinant of health. And this is our take on health. We say, okay, biomedical perspective is crucial and important, but not enough. And if we want to make our society healthier, and I would argue more just, more fair, we need to take into account the urban conditions in which different communities live. The WHO, the World Health Organization, this is one of the most important international organizations, and we are happy and we are lucky that we have some contact with them. But what they've developed is a very important shift, I would say, in the way we understand urban health. They were, they're trying to push forward our understanding that health in urban environment, especially in urban environment, should take into account a wide range of elements in order to improve the health of people living in cities. That's what they call the social determinants of health, which is a very important framework in our work. And here in this illustration, you can see that obviously in the red circle, you can see that, this is our body, our age, if we are young or old, our sex, male or female, or many other options. And we need to take into account that, we have some kind of biological conditions. However, this is not the main element that will dictate our health. We need to take into account individual lifestyle factors, our drinking habits, our smoking habits, for example, are we exercising or not? More importantly, we need to take into account social and community networks, okay? This is something, for example, that is very crucial during crises such as the pandemic, and will also affect very much our mental well-being. In the green part, you can see the wider environmental elements that will dictate our health. For example, our access to food, to education, our work environment. Are we working in a healthy environment? Let's imagine that on the evening when we are back home, we live in a very nice house, but maybe we're working in a very polluted industrial area, okay? We need to take into account whether we are employed, because unemployment is not just about poverty and bad access to food and so on and so forth, but it is also about our mental condition. Do we have good access to water and sanitation? Do we have access to health services? What are the housing conditions that we live in? All these elements will affect our health as individual, and I would argue our communities also. So we need to understand the general socioeconomic, cultural, and environmental conditions as a whole package that we, as architects, urbanists, geographers, sociologists, anthropologists, all these elements, we can understand them and we can develop strategies of intervention in order to improve these conditions that will certainly affect our health. And I think, we are all living in the last 2 years in a moment of crisis, a global crisis of the pandemic. And the articles and the research that were already published in the last year or so, they point very clearly on correlation between rate of infection, for example, or rate of spread of the virus, housing conditions, class, gender, ethnicity, and race. And what we can see is to be, very, very, how could I say, telegraphic, is that there is a correlation. I mean, if you are a white man living in good housing conditions in a city where you will have high quality open spaces, less dependency on public transportation for a long distance, you will live better than a woman who is, part of a minority group, older, who lives in poverty conditions. And then let's take it also to the extreme. And here I can report on a project that I was involved in Gaza around how the COVID affect people in Gaza, because even, the basic conditions in Gaza, that people don't have access to water. How can they wash their hands? Even the idea of working from home, which is very obvious to many of us, it's not obvious everywhere. People who don't have shelter, they cannot work from home. So, or, children who don't have educational alternative online, how can they study? So they will be outside. So, you can see that the COVID the pandemic in the last 2 years didn't create any inequalities. What we are witnessing is the expression of these inequalities and the limitation of a very biomedical approach towards COVID, because we all know that if you have, high quality open space, you can be outside, not to be in the crowd, and still enjoy being, in a social environment. So just to try and wrap up what I was trying to argue today is that we need these days urban experts, planners, architects, social scientists who will focus on health justice. And I would like to highlight the notion of health justice because I cannot see health, or I cannot see an attempt improving health conditions without linking it to the very political understanding of what equality or justice are. We need experts that can help in designing healthy cities, okay? If we will create infrastructure that will enable people to walk in the street, they will walk. If not, they will depend on cars, okay? And here I just want to mention a project that we did with our students last year on Nicosia, where public transportation is not very good, walkability or walking infrastructure is not very good, and obesity rates among children are very high. So obviously there is a connection between health challenges such as obesity and the infrastructure in the city. And we need, if we want to develop effective strategies of intervention, we need to to allocate resources and to acknowledge and recognize the rights of different communities in cities. Many cities in Europe, for example, where you have refugees and asylum seekers, we cannot provide an effective health services. We cannot provide effective health services if we don't take into account, for example, cultural, religious, and I would say basic human rights of these people. And what most importantly, and this is something or a message that I personally very much believe in, is that we experts who are dealing with urbanism and planning and urban design and architecture, we need to be proactive. We don't have, to wait for the crisis to come in order to design our cities in a way that will improve the health of urban dwellers. We need to be proactive. We need to initiate it from our understanding as architects, planners, etc., etc. And I think it's very, very important, especially to those of us who are coming from social science-oriented disciplines, that we need also to focus on urban governance and democracy. We cannot provide better health treatment to people or better and healthy urban environment to people if we don't have a good urban governance that puts public health and planning together on the top of the agenda. And my call to you guys who participated today is to think about you not just as urban studies or planners, but to think about yourself as planners, architects, landscape architects who wants to improve health in cities and within urban communities. So yeah, you are very welcome to go into the Bartlett website, the DPU website, and the MSc Health in Urban Development website to read more about our modules, our field trips, our approach to urban health. Thank you very much. I'm happy to take questions or comments, guys. Okay, now someone is asking, I'm sorry, but I cannot read the name. LH Liao Hang is asking how to improve residents' health awareness in cities. It's a very, very good question. And I can share with you that this year I'm working with my students on a project in Belfast. And we are working with an organization in Belfast called Belfast Healthy Cities. which is part of a network that the WHO, the World Health Organization, has established in different places in the globe. And their work includes from bringing health into education, bringing it into schools, into developing specific projects with communities in the city. So I agree with you that one of the challenges that we have is also to deliver the message that health is linked to our everyday environment, to people who live in cities, okay? So we know, all over the world, you can see projects that were initiated bottom up by communities, not always in order to improve health, but sometimes that was the outcome of it, okay? So for example, I can share, in few sentences, a project in Jerusalem, a city that I know very well, and I lived most of my life in the city. A group of residents in different neighborhoods, both Jews and Arabs, were advocating to develop a linear park in their neighborhood. It took many, many years, but then when the park was established, suddenly it became a space that many people, young people, old people, women, men, from all, I would say, from both communities are using this space for exercise, okay? So you can see how a very simple project of developing a green infrastructure in a city creates a situation that people can do better, or it encourages people to exercise, which is healthy, but also it enables people to meet each other, okay? Groups, people who were highly segregated, I wouldn't say that there is peace and love, but at least there is a space of encounter among different groups. So I think that we need to understand health as a multi-layered and multi-directional field. And if we want to encourage people in cities to improve their health, we need also to develop the message into communities through different channels, communities, schools, children, old people, etc., etc. I hope that it gave you some kind of direction of what we do in relation to your question. Okay. Thank you very much, guys.